Twice a year, GroupM collects media forecasts from about 70 countries around the world. And I'm in the middle of the exercise now, and I've got just about all the replies in. And we'll publish a new forecast on the 3rd of December. So you're going to just see a quick preview of that. Now, here's global economic output and global advertising, which gives the impression of being normal and almost stable, but it's not. And there's some big potential instability in this graph. The first point is that the geographic dependence now on markets with substantial growth is becoming quite critical. We're depending on really very few markets, China obviously, and a couple of others. Now, all of the BRICS markets, while we can expect reasonable advertising growth for the purposes of our horizon here, they've all got potentially serious growth problems 10, 15 years down the line. The other element hidden in this apparent stability is that digital growth seems to be reliable and highly predictable, but it's almost entirely offset by the decline of print advertising. And the third item is that the threat to the Western economy remain as intractable as ever. That is the US deficit, the impossibility of growth in the Eurozone, and a demographic problem which affects Japan, China, Germany. It's funny to see how the media portray the Eurozone problems. I was watching CNN this morning, which has to use a little bit of generic footage as shorthand for the Eurozone problem, and it has a mob being controlled with a water cannon. Anyway, so our global prediction of ad growth this year is 5.2%. The main items within this number are a huge recovery in Japan, which often doesn't impinge very much on the way that we think in the West, but Japan's media market's growing about 7% this year, which is replacing obviously the vast setbacks it endured last year with its own tsunami and the flooding in Thailand, which had a big effect on Japanese manufacturing. Closer to home, the Eurozone periphery's advertising shrank 15% this year, which was much worse than they'd expected. It's as bad as it was in 2009, and the Eurozone in advertising terms is now 40% smaller than it was at the peak, and in time terms it's 1998. Western Europe generally, we're expecting advertising to shrink 3% this year, which is a little bit worse than we thought 6 months ago. China, Brazil, Russia remain in the 10-11% growth range. China's come down a little bit, but it's in advertising terms definitely a soft landing there. USA forecast unchanged. The Olympics, probably a net negative for advertising in the USA. It attracts TV ad revenue, but equally it repels it as well. The election spending, a positive for ad spending, but it's not that relevant to us really. For one thing, it doesn't come through ad agencies. It's all handled by specialist media buyers in Washington, and nearly all of it is directed to local television stations in the swing states. Now, the Nordic position I've summarized here. I won't talk about Denmark. I get little bullet points from everybody else. I'll just quickly go through the ones I picked up from the other markets. Sweden has mentioned the saturation of internet reach and social media, but it's highlighting that usage is still rising on digital media. Sweden is one of the few markets which has warned that internet online display revenue might actually start to shrink now. I've heard this mentioned in a couple of other places. I wouldn't call it a trend yet, but it's a very interesting dynamic. The essential underlying element of this here is are premium media going to be replaced by performance media? Search is still growing pretty well everywhere. The interesting dynamic there, for me anyway, is that the volume of queries, that is, the supply of search queries, is rising, obviously with mobile. And the question is whether the long tail of small and medium enterprises can take up the slack. I mean, what we see at the moment is the price of search is falling per click. Norway, newspapers in a bit of difficulty, it would seem. TV share still growing, but it's only 22%. That's pretty low anyway. Online will apparently be the largest medium next year in Norway, just eclipsing TV with a 32% share. Finland reports healthy competition within linear TV, which I think is a theme across the Nordic range. It says online display is stabilizing. Social and search growing fast, but they're not measured in Finland. So I thought we'd just have a quick look at this. Since 2006, there's been pretty well a straight swap of share of ad budgets between print, newspapers and magazines, and online. In the Nordic region, print is unusually high, a 40% share still here, versus 30% share for online. But if this continues, then you'll see these lines will converge in 2015. They pretty well have converged in the rest of the Western world. In the UK, I ask our print buyers, I routinely ask them how much they're spending on digital. And the press teams, as opposed to the specific digital specialists, might say it's 10% of budgets now. And when I ask what they're spending this on, then, of course, print is just one of a very large menu. And advertisers, in the UK anyway, do seem to have an appetite for buying performance media online. So this question of premiumization, attracting premium prices for premium inventory, strikes me as the #1 strategic threat to print. And I'm a little bit disappointed the way the tablet market's evolving in the UK. I see it as an opportunity for print to capitalize on its premium status, especially with the advent of cheap tablets. We've got $200, $300 tablets coming through the market now. I'm generalizing here because not all print publishers are the same. But there's a reluctance to allow a liquid market in tablet inventory to be established. Specifically, the publishers are resisting an impression-based trading model, which I personally think is suicidal. They seem intent on preserving the print business, which is understandable, but I think it's short-sighted. Right, 2013 ad forecast globally, 5% again. It's a little bit of a downgrade from what we thought it would be in the summer. The main factors behind this number are that Japan's 7% growth this year slows to just 1% next year. In the US, the short-term problem is whether we get over the fiscal cliff. And our GroupM USA has told me they're expecting nearly 3% ad growth next year in the USA, from which I infer they think the Americans are going to solve the fiscal cliff problem. There's a quote from Churchill, The Americans will always do the right thing once all other possibilities have been exhausted. And the resolution of the fiscal cliff is a potentially interesting boost for the UK consumer. And historically, ad recoveries have normally started in the USA. So that's one to watch. Known macro threats, of course, remain a disorderly Eurozone démarche. The Eurozone periphery, in our forecast, still expects to be negative next year, -3%. They are habitually optimistic, which is understandable, although interestingly we're at the point now where media vendors are going to go bankrupt, and we may see a tightening of supply in some areas. We're already seeing it in Spain, where there's been a monopolization of TV. The oil price remains high thanks to a combination of newly industrialized countries' demand for it and obviously geopolitical considerations. $110 at the moment now. Peaked at $120 in the Arab Spring. I mean, the range of oil prices, $130 will kill any recovery in the West for sure. If we see it coming below $100, again, that releases a lot of spending power in the USA. The other macro is food price inflation, which is affecting everybody.